Good afternoon. Welcome back to the session. This is the last final session, the technical session of the LTC 2022. And the theme of the session is Research Data Services. Essentially, this is a session where the onus of responsibility shifts to typically the library information science profession, because this is here we are going to understand and ask you what you have done, what you can do, and what you are going to do. Because research data services is the service part, because today everybody is talking about, we moved from information services now to data services. So the LIS profession is tasked, I would use the word tasked, or we can even say, can claim a role in this research data management, provided we are all ready to offer research data services. So in this session on research data services, we have with us today Dr. Andrew Cox, who is a senior lecturer at the Information School in the University of Sheffield. Dr. Cox, one of his major focus of research naturally is about the response of the information profession to the changing landscape of whether it is introduced by the ICT, whether it's introduced by the current one that we are talking about, research data management, or any of this, and how do we build that kind of a workforce. Without further session is Dr. Anand Bhairappa. He is with the Indian Institute of Science, and then he's coming online. This is one change in today's format, so Anchor is also online, and I would like to invite our panelists, Dr. Vishal Rao, Dr. Manju Nayaka, and Dr. Raj Bhardwaj. So Anand Bhairappa is the anchor for this session. So can I hand over the session to you, Anand?
Okay, thank you very much, madam. It's my privilege to be part of LTC 2022, and so I would like to be very happy to be part of the last panel discussion, because we also get a lot of knowledge by attending previous sessions and also previous keynote speakers. So if you really, if I look at the concluding remarks of Professor Shalini, she said there are many stakeholders in research data management. So if I start from there, in my opinion, there are four major stakeholders in research data management. First, I would like to say library and information science professionals. Second, computer science professionals. Third, statisticians. And fourth is domain experts. Now, if I connect back to Andrew's talk, when he was talking about the skills and the gap to manage research data management, if you look at this, the gaps he mentioned, many of them are really, familiar to us. In fact, we are already doing some stuff and all. So that way, I believe, it's not going to be very difficult for us to effective services for our researchers. I think that's going to be the trend for all of us, and it is not really unfamiliar to us. If you look at LIS, if you observe, we have always, proved, we associate with new technologies, new tools, and we are long-term players in those domains. For example, if you look at CDA sizes, we went to that and we stayed there for 20 to 30 years. I don't talk about advantages and disadvantages. That is one. And we really did good jobs in institutional repositories, e-prints, and thesis and dissertations management and all of that. From this point of view, I'm sure that this is going to be our domain, or we can really get in and bring in a lot of value addition, and we can drive changes, and undoubtedly that will be very useful for the institutions and also to the world, and it will significantly contribute to the open science and all of that. So to talk more about this and also to help primarily this, library information science professionals, we are very three distinguished panelists. Now, the structure we have been given is each panelist will talk about 8 to 10 minutes, generally about their views, and then once they complete that round of, uh, looking at their views, then we'll pose one or two questions either from audience or from my side. Now, I would like to request first, first panelist is Kumar Bhardwaj from St. Stephen's College, Delhi. So, Dr. Kumar, can I request you to take over and share your thoughts for 8 to 10 minutes?
Thank you, Dr. Anand. And I'm also thankful to the chair, Professor Shalini Us, and the organizers of this conclave, especially Satyanarayana sir, for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on this topic. So, my experience of working in research data management is quite a few years old, actually, when I visited on a Commonwealth Fellowship to UK. And as a part of the Commonwealth Fellowship, I had to visit several universities, in fact, visited more than 30 universities in the UK, and visited several data centers in the country. And gradually, I inculcated interest for the research data management. And after return to India, first of all, I studied that what is the status of research data repository in the country. And we did an extensive survey of the online data repositories which were existed online. So we tried to find out what is actually the status. But if you look into this, the whole concept of research data management, it is actually foreign to all of us because we borrowed it from the West. But as we did mistake in the institutional repositories, everybody was actually after to customizing it, learning about the technological part, and hardly actually we think about populating the data into the repositories. I think that part we should be avoided into this aspect, especially when we are building research data management repositories. So research data management as a whole is not just building a repository, it is much more than that. Much more in the aspect is that here, you as a library and information science professionals are not actually accentuating the technology, but we need to actually advocate the researcher's concern. If I look into this subject, research data management, librarian role should not be actually technological oriented. Our role should be to advocate the concerns of the researchers. And we also need to think about what kind of advantages, what kind of incentives we can give. So at one part, we need to advocate the researchers' concerns, which is think about the ownership of the data, scooping of research data, and misinterpretation of the results. These are the main primarily concern, and one of the very extensive study conducted by the Wiley. These are the three major concerns they found from the researcher side. So if you are actually thinking to have a research data management in your institutions, don't think it's only about the research building a data repository. It is much more than that. If you look into the research data management system and the data generated by the researchers in the lifespan of one PhD research, on an average, one researcher create 1 terabyte of data in the PhD lifespan. So don't think we can solve the problem by building a data repository. It's much more than that. Apart from that, how you can mediate between the researchers' concern and how you can actually advocate for building a data management system, that you need to advocate that the data will remain accessible on the internet. Data will be in a publishable state when you are actually a researcher. And one of the objective of doing research is that I want to get a more visibility among my peers. And when your researcher data will be visible on the internet, and it is in a publishable state, obviously people will come forward and they will contribute the data into it. And obviously, when you are building a data repository, it will also demonstrate the integrity of the research. So that these kind of actually advocacy strategy you can make to encourage researchers to contribute the data into the systems. Apart from that, I'm giving you one of my examples as a researcher. I conducted research on legal information systems in 2015. It was completed, research was awarded, like PhD was awarded. But later on, after 4 years actually, one concept came into my mind, why this legal information system is primarily dominated by the males. So they need to study what is the difference between the female lawyer's perspective and what is the difference between the male lawyer's perspective. So, but luckily data was with me and I could identify the variables to distinguish these two parameters. So, so what you can think when your data is in a publishable state, you may not as a researcher, you may not be able to envisage how you can interpret that data from different contexts. But if it is available online, some other people can actually visualize that it can interpret in different contexts. So that is another actually strategy we need to have. So as a librarian, if I deliver my this discussion from a librarian perspective, you need to fit into yourself the concerns of the researchers and the incentives you can provide, like how you can encourage the researchers to deposit the data. Now, if you look into the data sharing trends, in one of the panels, I am librarian was sharing, and ma'am Shalini was also sharing that management people are not coming forward to deposit the data. So this trend is worldwide actually. If you look into the Wiley study, it shows that Germany is the leading country where there are 55% of the sharing trend occurs, followed by the Brazil 52%, US 46%, and the Japan 45%, and afterwards UK is a 43%. These are the leading countries which are actually, most of them are, only two are above 50%. So that data sharing trends are same almost everywhere. But what you need to have is, you need to also think about how you can execute your plan. Technology is not everything. So one of the shloka of Madhva Gita says, Vasan se jirnani yatha vyahai navani griti naroparani. So like we are here for some time on the earth. Similarly, technology also has a, time. Over a period of time, technology also changes. So our focus as a librarian, if you look into the FAIR principle, as a librarian, I don't look the FAIR principle FAIR. Actually, I look into the FAIR principle RIAF. So reusable, we should think first, then we should look into the interoperability, then we should look into the accessibility, and then the findability. So that's a first fundamental actually as a librarian, that FAIR, because FAIR is basically designed by the technologist. But as a librarian, I look into in a reverse order. If the data cannot be reused, it has no purpose to posting on the repository. It has no purpose to make it interoperable. There are a lot of perspective. And in fact, as a librarian perspective, I feel 5 laws of library science is much better than the FAIR principle. Because in the 5 laws of library science also says these things. Books are for use. The data is for use. Books are for use. Every reader should get his or her data, isn't it? So that is also interoperability. So that aspect we need to look into. And when you are actually try to make a research data management system, one major problem is actually it's a top-down approach. But if there is a national policy, all institutions can establish a data repository easily. But there are best practices also. There are some repositories where there were no national policy, there were no institutional policy, but they still could establish a successful data repository in their institution, for instance, the Harvard data repositories. So if you talk about the Harvard data repository builders, they will tell you that the repository was started actually by encouraging the researcher to demonstrating the benefits of the research data repositories in many ways. So this is one aspect that how you can build the data repositories by encouraging and by advocating, not just from the library side, but also from the researchers side also you need to advocate. Another aspect is data management planning. And in the data management planning, there are lots of studies have been done. And most of the studies come up with the conclusion that data management planning is actually a dead document, because researchers forget what they mention in the document. So we need to have a comprehensive research ecosystem where you can not just include your data, but also include the data management plan, and that ecosystem will actually follow you that what stage you have to do what. In fact, one of the study says that in data management plan, researcher mentioned that they will share the data, and in fact, in the end of the research, they never share the data with the public. So there are several studies. In fact, recently there is a project was started by DART, Data management plan as a research tool, and in which they are trying to build up a actually solution how this problem can be solved. I also working on one of the tools actually as a team member. It's called dmptool.org, which is the project of a California university. I'm a part of that team. And in that team, what we did in a DMP tool, so DMP tool can also integrate not just with the ORCID, but it can also integrate with the RSpace, which is a comprehensive research ecosystem platform. So where you can not include the data from other repositories, you can integrate, but you can also integrate the DMP tool. So researchers simultaneously tracking the research work, they can also track what they have mentioned in the DMP, that what they will do with the data. In fact, the planning of the data management DMP came from the publisher's side. When the publishers insisted that when you will submit the manuscript, you also have to submit the data along with it. And thereafter, the funding agency made it mandatory in the project proposal that you have to include this component. But one aspect actually, one of the failures of DMP, whole DMP system is that the data management interviews are not being conducted. And here comes the role of the librarians, that when you actually preparing the DMP tool for the researcher, you need to conduct a very comprehensive interview, that what you will do with the data, what are the different formats you will generate. So each and every stage, actually as a librarian, we need to give input to the researchers, and that's how we can make this DMP successful. So a whole research data management system, ecosystem, you cannot look into silos. All these things are interconnected, and DMP is one of them, and that can make your project successful. So apart from that, we also need look into, as Dr. Koch said, that there are some drivers and there are some influencing factors. So when you are making the strategies of the library in establishing the data repository, you need to actually act between the drivers and influencing factors. So your strategy should interlink the drivers factors, such as that your repository will provide the storage, it will provide the security and the trustworthiness the library has created from edges. That can also be one of the driving force, and of course the influencing factors such as acceptance and the incentives, data citations, visualization, all these things, governance and skills, that can also play a major role into the successful data management system. So if you look into the Indian scenario, when the National Data Sharing and Accessibility Policy was notified, unfortunately in the policy there is one component, and the component is that there are 3 layers of data. One layer is that's open data, then we have registered, and then we have a restricted data sets. But in the policy, they have also given that the registered and restricted data can be paid one. So the institutions who made their data registered and restricted, they can put the pricing into the data sets. So when you actually, I'm sure down the years there will be national data sharing policies for the higher education as well. So if such kind of policies comes up, we need to make sure that this kind of a clauses are not there to make the open science a reality from Indian perspective. So all over the world, the survey which we did and found out that there are the data repositories are actually the concept generated in the West, and mainly the 44% of data repositories come from the Europe, and the 40% of the repositories are coming from the North America. And only remaining, you can find out that 16% of the repositories are coming from the rest of the world. And the India share, as for the RE3 data, there are only 45 repositories, but there are, two dozen other repositories which are not indexed into the system, that registry. And but one part we are good actually, and that number of open data repositories percentage is more from India compared to the global data. The global data says there are approximately 60% of the data repositories are open. However, in India, we have around 69% of the data repositories which are open. But unfortunately, in the name of open data repositories, 44% of the data repositories, we cannot actually contribute data into the systems. So that's another unfortunate part. And the systems actually which we have created, most of these are using unknown software, no standard structures are there. So there are lots of problems. In overall, I can say that we are a very formative stage in data repository, but that's not the, actually, it doesn't mean we are lagging behind. Even if, sometimes if you are starting technology late, it has a lot of advantages, because you can think about what are the failures happen in the West and lots of things. So this is another data. And, so with this, I think I should rest now. And, but there's one more aspect, that we no need to consult this Western philosophy when we are managing the data. In fact, the Ranganathan philosophy tells us lots of things. So on an average, I already mentioned, on an average, one researcher generate 1 terabyte of the data in the lifespan. So if you will start managing that data, it will be a very Herculean task. So we need to think about the Ranganathan philosophy, and Ranganathan says the law of parsimony. So you need to follow the law of parsimony, that how you can save the data. So data retention we have not talked so far. So when people are generating so much of data, data retention policies should also be in place when your institutions are notifying the data sharing or accessibility policies. So with this, I thank you very much, and I will participate in another round. So over to you,
Thank you.
Chair.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Rajkumar, for sharing your wonderful thoughts. And so you always mentioned and highlighted that in the process of creating or providing research data service, the focus should be more on addressing the concerns of the research. Permission of the organizers, I would like to switch over to audience for asking questions to panelists.
My
Any
question
comments,
to
questions?
Dr. Bhardwaj, that as you told us that you are connected with that art space community, and I want to know how you are managing the data set versioning. For example, in GitHub and GitLab, we are managing software versions. Similarly, data sets may have many versions when we work. So that versioning control of data set, how you are managing there? Any idea?
This is slightly different, actually, managing the data. So there are various aspects of data management, like as a researcher's point of view, I'm sharing. Like if I'm a researcher and I want to share my data with the public, so there are two aspects into it. One aspect is that I will deposit my data with a discipline-specific people, so I will share the data in a discipline-specific repositories. But there are several discipline-specific repositories which allows us to create the account and deposit the data. But the other aspect is that I want to share my data with a wider audience, where there are interdisciplinary approaches also there, because there are many aspects, like I'm sharing, because here the data is not important. The story behind the data is important. So the researcher, I'm giving you answer as a researcher. So researchers make story out of the data. And I'm giving one example. Recently, we were working on a open access research, the India contribution to open access research, and I was collaborating with one of the teachers in LIS department in AMU. And he collected the data, the researcher collected the data, and we came up with some findings and tables. And we found that this is the India research and these are the policies. But suddenly, there was another data set I had with me, and the data set says that this is the age of the researchers who are publishing LIS research from India. And that data set is, Aurora sir is here, I should not mention it. The Vidwan gives us actually the date of birth of various researchers. Through the Vidwan, you can find out the years. So I fetched the data from the Vidwan, and that data we actually mapped, and we created another table, and we find out that this is the age and these are the publications coming from the young researcher and these are the senior researchers. So the data, story behind the data is important, and there are just discipline-specific repository and there are generic repositories. Like there are 4 generic repositories are very popular nowadays, and I've been using, like Figshare is one of them, which has a lot of facilities. And how Figshare gives you, the researchers, the ownership of the data is that you can make your data public or private at any point of time. If you want to make it private, you can just click on button and you can make it private. It will not be shared with others. And if you want to make it public, you can. And that these repositories, which are generic in nature, empower the researcher so much that you can also link the other data sets. Like if you want to make story with the different data sets, you can link between. There are version controlling also. You can also link the data management plan along with it. And they support almost all type of formats. So here is the story actually. Do we need to establish our own repository, which we would not be able, may not be able to, or might not be able to update on a very periodic basis? Or do we need to use the repository which already exists? There are backing behind it. There are people who are updating on a continuous basis. So that's actually the takeaway we can have from this conclave, whether to start the data repository at this time to manage the personal data, or we should use the existing infrastructure to manage our data sets. I hope I answer your question, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rajkumar. And with that, we'll go to the second question, please.
Good afternoon to one and all. Hi, this is Prahlad, working in an industry as an associate director, one of the topmost law firm, Ketan and Company. My question to Raj, as he had done a couple of research in the legal domain, how you compare RDM in academic and RDM in corporate? Because from last 3 days, what I am witnessing, the data, definitely, but data in academic sense and data in corporate sense, there are slightly different. So can you guide how we can, as a corporate, how can we implement RDM in corporate sectors? Definitely there is a knowledge management system, there is a DSpace institutional repository, but how specifically RDM can be implemented in the corporate sector? Just one or two insights.
It's slightly difficult because so far I never worked in a corporate sector. I worked in a government, academic, teaching, librarians and government as well. And the various projects also. But as far as my understanding is concerned, data in a corporate sector actually is a very diverse in nature. So diverse in the sense, if you go into the IT corporate sector, the application they generate, that is also kind of a data. So managing the application can also be one part there. Different application they manage, and then they make the big software. And I'm giving you one of the example. Several years ago, actually, Shalini ma'am is responsible for that. We had visited the Honeywell in Bangalore. So Honeywell, what they were doing, they were managing the codes of their small applications. And when they had request from the client to make a bigger program, so they used to, instead of creating the application from the scratch again, they used to use the existing application to make the bigger program. So that kind of a mechanism you can have in IT corporate sector, I'm sure, but you are working in a legal information. So legal information is, the data is a very sensitive in nature, like the evidence you generate, the data from the legislative processes. So you can categorize the legal research data into two parts, legislative as well as the legal aspects. And then you have to make a relationship between the legislative and the legal informations. And that kind of a mechanism itself is a research data. So because legal information you cannot see into the silos. The legal and legislative you have to look together actually to make the research data systems in the corporate sector. I hope I addressed it.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rajkumar. I can also share my experience. I worked in GE for about 20 years, and in corporates, what matters to them is, they look at the confidentiality and the, classification of the data and publications. For example, in GE, GE was, filing for about 3,000 per year. They were publishing about 500 papers. There was a clear-cut policy in place that every piece of information you want to publish outside or share outside, that will go through the classification process. For example, every 101 manager will look at your data or a publication, whatever is that, and their job is to classify that information or that publication based on the sensitivity of the content in that. So based on the sensitivity, they had a policy to classify documents into 4 levels. One is public. It means there is no confidentiality information. It can go outside. Second is internal. There is something, for example, flowcharts kind of a thing, org charts and all of that. So generally GE preferred to retain them for internal public, employees only. Third was the confidential. And that information, when you classify as a confidential, author is supposed to give the reader list, or the people who can really have access to that based on the technology we are working and who can really do that. But at the same time, somebody, some other employee from different country, if they wanted to access, there is always somebody who is owner of that publication who can grant permission, and that permission was given to the technology leader for the highest. The fourth level was restricted, in the sense, say for example, you come out with a paper and you ask people to really go and do a presentation in the conference, you may not get permission. Somebody may see in the approval process that this document has a patentability stuff. So once you publish, you may lose you may create the prior art, so that you lose the chance of getting the patent. So processes are important. Corporates are best examples in this world to really see how they really classify the content, how they control the content. In academics, it's very difficult. In fact, we don't really bother about the classification of the content. Corporates generally, before they give out any piece of information, they thoroughly look at that content, they classify that, they clearly define what to do, what not to do, kind of. That way, there is a lot of corporates work very differently compared to the academics. So I hope I brought in a little clarity, and maybe with the interest of time, we can take one last question.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting discussion debate that's going on about the data from the private sector and its privacy or openness. In this context, I think I would like Dr. Vishal Rao to throw some light, because health is a sector which is significantly in the private sector domain, but health sector is something which protects the public interest. So you work for the public interest entirely, but predominantly the investment comes from the private sector. How is it balanced? How is the whole research data management balanced there? Its availability or reusability, whatever else. So can you throw some light on that?
So as of now, if you look at the structure of research,